I have good luck
I
with
don't have an answer for it.
guys that farm down my road or whatever. A couple of young guys bought this property right around my place, and I've got them at least mowing the road after the 10th of July.
I think there's a change happening out there.
I hope so.
I think more, you got a little change in the guard, as far as farmers go. And I don't mean to blast farmers. I mean, I know they're making a living, but I think there is a change. And with our little wetlands, I've seen that. The first little wetland we put in, I went door to door up in the Ohio area, and I ran into some people that are into conservation, and hopefully now that you've got a place in place, that the other neighbors, and you know how farmers talk, the other neighbors will see this and want to do the same thing and do the right thing. And I think we're getting there, but it's a slow process.
Guys that rent land, what they run into is, it's in their contract, they have to mow that. It
Yeah.
has a lot to do with the landowners or people, the farm managers.
One of the things Zach said, though, really hit on something about the birds and the insects.
Yeah.
When we started using neonicotinoids in our,
I hate those things.
I
I'm a beekeeper.
mean, our insects are
There was
disappearing.
a big drop,
We're doing an avian survey right now with Illinois Natural History Survey on whippoorwills, which of course, I grew up with whippoorwills and you never hear them anymore.
Right?
And kestrels, and so everybody's familiar with kestrels, those lovely little
I've
falcons.
seen some of them today.
Yes. Do you know that if you look at a skin from those two birds, a museum skin from 50 years ago, they're a third larger than they are today? Because those species rely on large moths that are high in nitrogen. They don't exist around here anymore. They just don't have the food source to raise young and to grow. And to think that because we're greedy, those birds are shrinking in size, what a terrible thought.
Zach, did you have anything to?
Well, for our organizations, I guess to speak a little bit to what we're trying to do about that situation, we've begun, Natural Land Institute has existed so far for a long time now to protect natural places and restore natural land. And we've begun an agricultural initiative which was spurred by the donation of some farmland to our organization. So the farmland is still operational. It's a working lands initiative, and it's been a huge learning curve for our board and for our staff and for the people who know our organization to be involved with working lands and agricultural landscape is not what perhaps the founders of our organization had in mind, but it is a way that we are going forward and working with the farmers who we are able to use more conservation techniques in their farming, to try to spread this information, to provide an example, to show that, yeah, you can get higher yields using some of these strategies, and we're growing also at the same time more bugs, and more bugs equals more birds, and essentially kind of trying to just hold that network that still exists together, trying to keep that glue still adhesive is kind of a big part of what this is all about. So our Working Lands Initiative kind of hits at that a little bit, and then, through learning about this, we're able to talk to other organizations and talk to other farmers and learn from other farmers. And we're learning that a lot of farmers actually have these things on their mind. They have seen these changes. I have not. I've seen sandhill cranes I've seen them come back in my lifetime. They were endangered until 2009, right? And then they were delisted, and their numbers have sure.
Where was that picture taken?
These are all Amboy Marsh and Vermel.
You have that many there now?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen their numbers increase, but in general, we've seen a lot of declines. For grassland species like meadowlarks, or even more so for bobolinks and Henslow sparrows. And,
Bobolink, yeah.
So just getting different kinds of farming back in order, doing things that are better for the soil, and essentially having working lands that provide more homes for more organisms is super important. So however we can do that, you know, go talk to your families, just try to instill ideas about what are decent things to do to each other and other organisms. I mean, it all kind of boils down to what is beneficial for everybody as we go forward. And perhaps it's not some of our more archaic, ingrained ideas about, grain agriculture, but changing that a little bit to incorporate some of these.
Thank you.
So people who are locked into current farming practices, I have to think that they don't really think that's sustainable, that they're gonna be doing it 50 years from now.
Which, something specific you're speaking?
Well, no, just the whole.
You mean like mowing roadsides or?
I mean, road crops and fields and dirt that is sterile and poisons being washed down the river to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, it's just not sustainable.
They're gonna, to look at it from people, I work for farmers, and they're gonna do what Monsanto and the big companies and whatever, they're gonna do what they can to stay in business and to make a profit. And if that's the way that you're gonna do it,
With an army of lobbyists.
that's the way you're gonna do it. I mean,
What's the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics? The microeconomics is me, and I've got to stay in business. The macroeconomics is the big picture, and that's a whole different kettle of fish.
One of the things, I guess, that gives me hope is our executive director of Illinois Audubon Society was just recently put on a statewide committee with Farm Bureau and some other entities to try to look at some of these issues and problems. And it's obvious that we have to work together. The farmers, everybody's gonna have to work together as opposed to just fighting it. Telling somebody, you're wrong, you're doing this terrible and you're killing the world, does not work, I may have tried that in the 70s, it didn't work. So to your point, some of the farmers are concerned about what's gonna happen 25 or 50 years from now. In fact, the dicambra thing is huge
That is.
right
Yeah.
now. It's huge, and a guy that does a lot of tree work for us at Amboy Marsh came in the other day and he said, I'm not spraying anymore on my farm. And we thought, wow, this is great. And then he said, no, because of liability, I'm gonna hire
That's it.
somebody to
Oh,
spray.
right.
So I
That's
won't be
it.
liable.
That's it right there.
Because
Yep.
that's true, the dicambra drift is
Right.
a huge issue. And so I think you're right that farmers are thinking about it a little bit more.
But
We just have to
the
provide
guys
more
think
Are any of you
education.
familiar with the lawsuit that City of Des Moines filed against the drainage districts to the north of them? Their water had chemical in excess of standards, and they sued, but these counties and these, I don't know what the governmental entities were, they were drainage districts or county government or what, but they had better lawyers than Des Moines did, because Monsanto and Cargill and so forth were paying for the lawyers, and the Storm Lake, the editor of the Storm Lake newspaper up there won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing that. And that was what, 2 years ago, maybe? Or maybe just a year ago.
One of the things that when we first got Amboy Marsh, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was very interested in what we were doing because, of course, they're, that's their business. And they had asked us to take samples from all the wetlands at Amboy Marsh for ag chemicals and other naturally occurring elements too, which we did. And they want to come back in 10 years and see, after taking our farm fields out of crop production, if those have lowered themselves or if they're still there. So, it's a huge issue. When you're talking about somebody's livelihood, it's, whether you're a farmer or a car builder or a shoemaker or a baker, it's hard to mess with someone's livelihood.
Does Does anybody else have a question?
You talked about the McCutcheon wetlands right over here, and you said treated. I thought that was just settled out the phosphates and nitrates, or do they actually treat that to try to get?
Oh, the Benucci farm?
Yeah, Benucci.
Yeah, it's to get the excess nitrates out.
But you don't treat it, it just.
You
settles.
treat it with the wetland.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fine.
the
I was
wetland.
thinking chemicals.
Yeah, no, the plants,
Okay.
we planted a lot of wetland plants and everything, and I know Gene can say how productive that farm was to take the nitrogen out of that tile water, and it's actually, the tile, correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, but, the tile actually starts at the Benucci home farm,
Right, so-
and it runs across the road and everything, it runs right down to that wetland, so it's all tile water. And as everybody, well, you know, I grew up around a farm, you know, when they put nitrogen on in the spring, a lot of that runs off, and that's what ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, we're actually pumping it out of that little tile, that creek there, and it goes into the wetland, and the plants actually take the nitrogen out, release it to the atmosphere, and then the water goes on. Phosphorus is a little different story. It comes in on the little, on either dissolved or mixed in with the dirt, and actually falls down in the soil, and there's only so much capacity for the soil to take with phosphorus, because it just basically lays there. But the plants there again help that process, because when the plants die and decay and everything, and the leaves and everything, that creates more soil to be able to store more phosphorus. But the nitrogen itself is actually taken out. It's one of the things we did at Hennepin from the very get-go. We had we used to take, and I think we did it the first 8 or 10 years we were there. We took water samples from the seeps, which is along the east side of the project, and that's all underground water that comes from farm fields up above. And we took readings there, we took readings in the lake, and we took readings in the Illinois River. And all were sent to Iowa State University and most of it was for nitrogen. Because we wanted to see what the flow of the nitrogen was coming out of the seep water, and then once that seep water, that's what actually feeds the lake at Hennepin, besides rainwater. And then we saw that nitrogen disappear in the lake, and then different periods of the year, you'd see what the flow of the Illinois River was, the nitrogen that was coming down there, that eventually gets down to the Gulf of Mexico. So what this up here is doing is treating that water before it ever even gets into the creek. And I think it could be a really big thing, a really big thing.
So is that a test case? I mean, you're involved with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm familiar with it, but I don't know, is that one of many, or?
it's one of 3, right, Gene?
Right.
We've got 3 right now. We've
And
got
we're
one
real- Yeah.
at the Benucci farm here, we have one at Thacker Farm up by Ohio. And that one, what's nice about the Benucci one, you can drive by and you can see it.
Yeah.
The Thacker one's kind of hidden away, but they're both fantastic. It's definitely, you saw 2 farmers right there that have kind of changed the process to be able to go along and do something like that. And then plus it provides habitat too, and it's all the wetland plants is what's taking care of the nitrogen.
I've seen flocks of ducks in there.
Yeah, and basically it's what we had all down our rivers years ago, before everything got drained away, you know, I mean, that's what the plants do, you know. And then the other thing that happens too, you know, I see one big issue that's gonna happen to this country around the world and everything, is gonna be water, clean water, to be able to drink,
Yeah.
you know. And if we don't do something with that stuff now, I mean, as a species, we're gonna be in trouble.
So the idea is to get all the farmers to do it, but the,
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, yes, yeah, you're exactly right, yeah.
Is there like grants that help them to do this?
There's stuff out there, yeah. I mean, that's one thing my organization is very good at, is finding those places to you know, to get those grants to do that stuff. But eventually, it's gonna be something that a farmer should have to, you know, do himself, you know.
So the wetland, excuse me, the Benucci one, their last year, so there's 2 ways to kind of measure effectiveness, efficiency, and then kind of actual amount removed. And efficiency at sometimes last summer was 95%. So 95% of the stuff, of the nitrate that came in, stayed in the wetlands, it was broken down, before the water left and went into that creek. Our one up north has been a little different because it doesn't have quite the same landscape. So this one here is really, we put water in and there were cattails, within like 5 months. So that location of Benucci's, has the right kind of land underneath it and the right seed bank. So it takes a while for these to kind of come up and become operational, because there's bacteria that's playing a role in there as well. And so the one up north hasn't been quite as effective, but it's been, in the first year and a half, the one up north pulled out 3,000 pounds of nitrate were removed from the water from the time it came into that wetland before it left. So, and we're hopefully gonna get our 2018 numbers here. The researchers are coming back next week to put out the water monitoring equipment, so we'll be very interested to see. Benucci's will be pretty much fully operational for the whole season, so we look forward to having.
And then
So
along
you
the,
had 3, where's the other one at?
The other one is between Sonneman and Cullum in Livingston County. Right now, we're working in a 6-county area, excuse me, Livingston, LaSalle, Marshall, Putnam, Bureau, and Ford. There's a watershed group in Livingston and Ford counties, a farmer-led one that we've been doing work with. And then also Marshall, Putnam has just gotten a big pot of money from the state of Illinois to do some water quality work in those 2 counties over the next 3 to 5 years. So we'll be helping them with that. There's certain landscape things that have to be in place, so not every farm is gonna be perfect for that, but there are a lot of other practices that will work just as well. We've looked at locations in Bureau County where the landowner wanted to put in a wetland, and it just was not, you gotta have a lot of things kind of have to line up to be right for a wetland. So we connected them with some people to put in a bioreactor. So there are farmers out there who are willing to do it, and fortunately there's cost share from US Farm Bill money. Hopefully the rates are gonna get readjusted now and actually pay for what today's costs are versus what some of the work in the past has been. But we love Bureau County because they've been great to work with. We work with all the soil and water and NRCS and FSA. Starting to get in with the FSA folks. So yeah, there are dollars there. And our plan is to get these in as many places as we can, because as one of the Benucci family told me, regulation is gonna happen. This is our way of getting ahead of that, so that we're doing a practice that gets ahead of it, so.
and then the great thing that goes along with this, I went up to the Ohio place up there at their farm there, and here's a snapping turtle in the middle of this little pond out in the middle of nowhere. You wonder where the heck did he come from? Little wood ducks, you know, so I mean, just, and different, I can't remember the shorebirds we had up there, you know, and these are tiny little areas too. They're not the 3,000 acres that have been operated.
They're about an acre actual footprint within some buffers on the side, so they're not huge.
Did you have another question?
Yeah. Is the GPS farming helping much as far as water pollution, where they're not trying to put over chemicals on it?
I think it's going to right now. There's a really big, and this is my family too, so my family, we don't farm in Illinois, but we farm just across the river in Iowa. There's a big curve kind of coming when folks who are my dad's generation, and you know, he's just 80, my brothers are pushing to do some stuff with GPS, and he hasn't been real comfortable, you know, spending any money on that. I would say in 10 years, we will see a huge change in how any kind of chemical fertilizer whatever is applied. Because what the research is showing and the early demonstrations are showing, you don't need to put on as much as you do, especially when you start talking about the insecticides and the pesticides. Because if that place isn't gonna grow anything or grow very much, it's not worth putting anything on it. So I think it's gonna allow us to have these little maybe micro sites within a field, or farmers are gonna finally go, they're gonna have enough data that's gonna make the point that that's a losing proposition to farm that 3 acres, because whatever you spend on it is a fraction of what what it produces is a fraction of what you spend on it. So I think that will fundamentally change how farmers look at land. It's just, we kind of have an older landowner group right now. If you look at who owns farmland, they tend to be 50 plus, and so they aren't really comfortable yet with some of the technology, but I would say in 10 years, it'll be a whole nother world.
Right, there'll
It's
be a
already here.
generational shift.
Yes, exactly.
It's already here.
Yeah.
Variable rate,
Oh, yeah, and it's.
variable rate fertilizer applicators are out there.
Yep.
I know, we use them, the guys that I work for use them.
Right.
I have a non-farming question, and it goes back to something that you said, Zach, about what we can plant. I live in town, what we can plant in our backyards to generate more insects, or at least do something even on a small scale. What can I do?
I can kind of answer a little bit for Zach. Prairie Moon out of Minnesota has a catalog. that
Oh, really?
It can address, I mean, they're, and, well, the guy that, you probably know him, don't you, Bill? Yeah, I mean, the guy who kind of started this outfit up there is from Ohio, Illinois.
And you don't have to be smart, it's a butterfly garden, I just check it.
Exactly.
You don't have to know all the plants, or they do the thinking for you.
Good,
Well, one
'cause
of
I'm
the-
not,
yeah.
that's why.
But
I
like
need
Rick
some-
said, you need to stick with a good nursery,
Yeah.
because the thing that really breaks my heart is everybody goes to buy plants at the big box stores.
Yeah, I know what you're gonna say.
And many of them are treated pre-emergent with neonicotinoids. So you're bringing these plants home and planting them for the butterflies, and you're killing the butterflies.
Killing the butterflies and the
So
bees.
be sure,
Yep.
go to Walmart and ask them, and I do. Go to every store you go to and say, what are your plants treated? Because if enough of us ask those questions, and some of them have, some of the big stores in the suburbs have quit using plant sources that do that, because enough people like you said, hey, wait a second, I wanna buy your plants, but I don't want them treated, because they're gonna kill the very things I planted them for. Illinois Audubon also, on their webpage, we have a backyard habitat program that you can get a brochure that tells you what to plant, and you can get certified as Illinois Audubon Society backyard habitat, whether it's a window box or a million acres.
Yeah, I just recommend, about everybody in this room goes home this summer, go to Prairie Moon's, website, figure out, is your yard sunny? Do you want to put some wildflowers in that back corner of the yard that you never think about, that may as well be growing something useful anyway? Go home and plant, 5 to 10 species of wildflowers, and just have that little corner be the place where the butterflies and the moths and the weird beetles go.
You can't believe how to change my little yard around, just a couple different plants. Columbine, for example, it used to grow wilder all around over here. I mean, my God, you should see the hummingbirds come to that plant when it blooms. And it didn't hardly take anything.
And that's a great conversation starter with your neighbors,
It is.
possibly too, or
Yeah.
some kids, maybe like, oh, look at the hummingbirds, and you can tell them, oh, those plants are supposed to be here, that the hummingbirds need those plants, and start to plant, no pun intended, plant these seeds, get these seeds in our brains. That's the big thing.
Sure.
Has anybody got any ideas how you can get young kids interested in this stuff? It doesn't seem to, most of them are, let's talk about Power Garden, they're gonna just laugh at you.
They don't have a Nintendo game with prairie plants.
Yeah.
That's
That
a,
might
that's
be
a
a
tough,
good
that's a
idea
tough
to
one.
develop.
Yes, you
How
have to
many-
use
You know, you
technology.
volunteer gardens, you young kids come to those.
Develop video games where kids can
Right.
learn how
Roy,
to
did you have a question?
be good.
Well, this thing we, regarding the plants in our yard. We have the Natural Resources Conservation pollinator biologist with an office not 2 miles from here, at the USDA office.
Yeah.
And in addition to what some of these private entities have, most a number of soil water conservation districts have plant sale days, where they will harvest from their properties. And not only is it that a buy local situation, but it's also a contact for non-farm and a farming entity. So that, there's that thing going on too.
And if you're interested, they're having one March 24th to do this, May 24th. They also don't put in the name, but I can get it back to the date.
Well,
Back to your question too, Cornell University, which is the epitome of bird studies in the world, they have a video game for kids out that
Oh,
just
do
came
they?
out, and it's amazing, and that's working with technology to grab these kids.
What's the name of that video game?
I can't remember it, I just read the article in Living Bird, Cornell's magazine, and it's just Google Cornell birds, and you'll get on their webpage, because
working on it.
they're breaking box, or, I don't know, it's something that
I
we
never
never
wondered
heard
how
of.
that
Not just
Sometimes
Angry Birds,
beautiful
right?
games.
No, not Angry Birds, no.
Sometimes with kids, it's as simple as planting stuff in your yard.
Yeah.
I live in Peru and bought my house last spring, and I planted a whole bunch of butterfly attracting plants. And my office just happens to sit kind of right next to that part of my lawn. And this summer, I had windows open, and I would hear kids would come over and go, "Did you look at all those butterflies?" I mean, they were just blown away to see more than one butterfly. And so sometimes it's just making it a really out there public thing, and it will draw, I mean, they were, and so I kind of came out to talk, and then they were like running away. I'm like, no, I'm not chasing you off. I was just gonna, come and see if you had questions. And they were just completely fascinated. And these are kids I mean, I've literally been living there 3 months. So I don't, it's not that I know them, but if you build it, sometimes they will come and go, "Oh my God, that's amazing."
So if you see me out there.
Probably because they don't
I can help you a little bit.
figure that out. Somebody's not teaching them that stuff at school.
Is the name of the game, Birdsong Hero Game?
No, it was like
Wrong
breaking
game.
box, or they may have more than one,
Right.
because
Right.
they may have more than
It's-
one.
Yeah,
If
it's put
somebody's
together by
really
the
interested, I will certainly look it up in that magazine that's sitting on the table and
Yeah.
call you or email
Birdsong
you.
Hero Game from the Bird Academy at Cornell Lab, so.
Oh, and that may be too, it might have stuck a different name in my mind, but it was something
What was
like
the
that.
magazine?
Living Bird, which is Cornell University's bird magazine that comes out to its members.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is kind of a general sort of question. I haven't been to that many natural areas. I have been Hopper, of course, and Emiquon down by Havana, and been out to the Roche Sanctuary in Nebraska. But looking at Emiquon, if we had unlimited money, how much land do you think is out? I mean, are there big parcels of land along the Illinois River, say from Starved Rock all the way down to the Mississippi, that is ripe for making into natural areas?
If we had a
If
lot of
only you had the
money,
money?
we could do a lot of great things. Unfortunately, money is certainly an issue to purchase land.
Emiquon was a drainage district just like Hennepin
Yeah.
Hopper was, only a lot larger in size. The Hennepin Drainage District, where Hennepin Hopper is now, was the northernmost drainage district along the Illinois River. But there are bigger drainage districts by Emiquon and down farther, and then there are a lot of places along the Mississippi that actually, when they had the record flooding here a few years ago, the Crook levees and everything were the same thing that could be done, that we did at Hennepin, that they did at Emiquon. There's a lot of areas like that.
And flooding is only gonna get worse, right?
Exactly,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
So farmers are, you know, they might be, as time goes by, more and more willing to unload that land.
Well, that's the thing, you know, public agencies, the state, our county forest preserves, have secured we've got about as much of the remnant stuff protected as we have access to. The next thing, I mean, the biggest owners of natural lands that are left in the state of Illinois is private land ownership. I mean, it's farmers, it's people who just own, you know, a couple hundred acres. It's been in their family for decades, for a century perhaps. It's those landowners that are gonna be able to turn the tide when it comes to large complexes of land. But going back to average everyday people, I mean, it's private land ownership extends into towns like Princeton here. I mean, if you got a third of an acre lot, it's time to start looking at what we can do to try to increase pollinator habitat, try to produce more food for ourselves, to try to educate those around us about those things in general. So I just wanted to make that.
One of the most wonderful things to me since we purchased Amboy Marsh and Grinnell is the number of landowners in Lee County who have called Illinois Audubon and said, I'm going to sell my land, are you interested? Which is
That's nice.
just very, yeah, they say, these crazy people paid $2.5 million for this small sand, what's the matter with them, you know? Well, we have picked up 2 more parcels since we bought that, and we're working on a 3rd right now. In fact, there's a gentleman by the name of David Holman that maps natural areas and does a spectacular report every year. And Illinois Audubon preserved more land last year than any other entity. And I keep telling Jim Herkert, our director, hey, can't lose that. We gotta get more next year too. So I see that as, I'm optimistic about the fact that people see something and they'd sort of like to do it. And back to our small NAG group, which is not part of Illinois Audubon. We have Bartlett Woods, we have Pike Creek, we have Mound Hill Prairie, we have Ryan Wetland, and all of those sites were either donated to us by families or we purchased them very, very inexpensively because those people wanted part of their heritage to live on forever. And I will tell you one really quick story. Mound Hill Prairie, very small prairie, 2nd highest point in Lee County. It's a limestone outcropping, drop dead prairie on top of it, just fantastic. And I've known about it for 66 years. And the family owned a big farm. The father died eventually. The farm was sold. They divided out this small hilltop and tried to sell it for house lots, 2 house lots. They want $100,000 for. And we couldn't buy it, of course. The mother moved to Seattle with her son, and I kept emailing back and forth a couple times a year. Oh, this is a great prairie. Do you mind if we burn it? You know, send them a picture of the coneflowers and the drop seed all over the place. And eventually, after about 7 years, the guy emailed me and he said, I'm really sorry to tell you, but my mother died. Would you come to the funeral? This is sort of weird. I mean, I don't really know these people, but I said, certainly out of respect, I will come to the funeral. And they brought her back here to Amboy to bury her. A very small funeral. It was basically the family. And they handed me the deed to Mound Hill Prairie. And they said, you know, this is what our mother wanted to do.
That's nice.
Wow.
2 things. One, the largest contiguous farm in Illinois was Wagner Farms down on the west side of the river at Havana. And that was all bottom ground. It was all backwater to the Illinois River. At the same time, Hennepin Hopper was drained and turned into farmland, and it all had to be pumped out. And the state bought all of that and turned it into a wetland. And, you know, it was interesting to see this 11,000 contiguous acres become a wetland, and the related marshes, the related dry spots that were in there. You know, I can still look at places in there and go, I remember seeing cattle in there.
Lots of cattle.
Lots of cattle.
Yeah, lots of cattle.
The other thing about Bureau County, many of us owe a real serious debt to Don Pretch, who
Yeah.
was the
Yep.
district conservationist for NRCS, originally SCS. Here in Bureau County, we've got this very unique piece of 6 mile long, well, no, it's not quite 6 miles, it's about 3.5 miles of prairie that's about 100 yards wide between here and Wyanett. You know, when they built the new road, Don talked him into putting that into prairie grass. They've got McCune Prairie, they've got another prairie up at Walnut. There is a little, it's McCune Sand Prairie. It's a real interesting piece to walk on. You can see prickly pear cactus, and who would think that you have prickly pear cactus in Illinois? Growing natively, and it does.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of it growing.
And there are several other pieces that they have picked up, mostly by family gift. And, you know, Don got a lot of credit, he got a lot of derision too, but, you know, he found some prairie grass that hadn't been seen in the area in probably 75 years, and he found some growing out between here and Wyanett, in that prairie grass. And, you know, it's just a tremendous thing to go look at. There's another piece of it up at, they call it Indian Boundary.
Yeah.
When you go north on 26 and you make the
Curve.
one swing just
Oh,
north
yeah.
of Casebeer, on that northwest side is the Indian Boundary Prairie, and it's well worth walking through.
Is that a remnant?
Yeah.
That is? Okay. I drove past that on the way here.
Yeah. And I was gonna throw out a match when I went by.
You wanna go do it?
Chris?
Yeah, I have a question, especially those of you who are familiar with Lee County. Are you familiar with the Franklin Creek Grist Mill and the surrounding conservation area?
Very much so, yes.
Okay, for a brief time I was on the board, and I learned real quickly how dedicated the people are when they talked about buying land, farmland, as it became available, and they just looked at each other and said, how many are you divvying up to help?
Yep.
I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't know this was part of the deal.
Part of the board.
But anyway, it is an amazing area, and it includes woodland, hardwood woodland, and it includes bedrock outcroppings and some large, various large springs. But the amazing part about it is, well, what happened was about 40 years ago, and you probably know better than I, maybe more than 40 years ago, they were talking about, this was up near, between Franklin Grove and the Chusa Grasslands, just south of the Rock River, about an hour from here, and it's about 900 acre park, and about 40 more 50 acres they have bought in addition that they are trying to renovate or reconstruct or whatever you call it. I know the most recent one they're trying to make into wetland. And
Right.
so, anyway, they did build a number of years. Anyway, as I was saying, they were going to make it into a gravel pit. And so the city, the town of Franklin Grove got together and they bought some of that land and eventually sold it to the state. And so now that's their idea, is they buy it and then they sell it to the state. State
And
seems
that's-
to be
and those-
taking a while to buy it back.
Well, yeah, that's one of the problems, but
Yeah.
that is a spectacular
It is
example
great.
of volunteers, because there was Ellen Baker, Ivan and Maxine Hullen, those people, they put
They
their whole
dedicated their
life
lives to it,
into
yes,
doing
yeah.
that. They did, and did a spectacular job. I remember we had bake sales to try to buy land because they were gonna subdivide next to the nature preserve,
Mhm.
you know, and we had a big sale trying to raise money, got that land, and it's
Well,
a
they
great
built this
example.
grist mill that's a working grist mill
Yeah.
that's built according to how it would have been built back in 1840, you know, without nails and things, with pegs. And it is it's kind of plain on the outside. You go inside, it is
It's
gorgeous.
amazing.
And it's got displays. They had a Smithsonian display a couple of years ago on the watershed. And then last year it was on the forest, and then it's going to be on pollinators. But another thing that's amazing is that there is a path along the creek that is handicapped accessible. It is a sidewalk that goes all along the creek, gorgeous woodland with amazing flowers this time
And
of year.
skunk cabbage
Just
too.
flowers everywhere, and it goes all the way to a place where there's a pond for fishing, and they even built an outcropping for the handicapped to be overlooking it with like a pavilion so that they can fish as well. So I really recommend that people.
Don't tell her how they're talking this up, I want her back on the board.
Yeah, well, it's an hour away, so I'm just on the education committee, and that's another thing, they do have a building that's a house that a farmer, they bought that part of the house and they're renovating it to use as an education site. And then they are hiring, they're looking for a summer intern that they're gonna hire. So if anybody knows anybody, and they do a lot of that stuff you're talking about with, counting the wildlife and collecting seeds and cleaning up the area. They have a lot of parsnip, which I guess is just awful.
Well, I think one thing we've certainly learned tonight is there are a lot of places in Illinois to go and spend a day and see all this beauty and what all you know, the three of you and your organizations are doing for our state and the environment and our kids. And can't thank you enough for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of wrap this up, but stay and you guys have a few minutes. And if you have any questions directed specifically to them. But again, thank you so much from the library, from Voices, and from your organizations. And thank everybody who came tonight too. Sure appreciate it.
And we want to see everybody at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
March, right? Don't forget.
Has anybody had any